Welcome to What's My Thesis. I'm Javier Proenza, and today my guest is Melina Paris of Angel City Culture Quest podcast. We are doing an exchange. You guys can go see me be interviewed on her show. She's coming here because as hosts, you never really get to talk about yourselves so much. So It's a nice opportunity. How long have you been doing the show?
It'll be 3 years in June.
And you started, 3 years ago, like 2021?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The time is flying, but yeah, it's right around that time. Yeah. Coming out of the pandemic, supposedly.
Yeah. What made you interested in podcasting as a format and also art podcasting? Because we're in a particular specific niche.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My day job, I'm a journalist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I work for a paper called Random Lengths News, and my beat is art and culture.
Oh,
I do other stories too, but that's my beat.
Wow. So you are specifically saying a journalist, not a critic. So you're covering the scene, not so much criticizing the work?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
And then how does that, how do you, what's the criteria for what you write about? You know, your beat is or let's get more specific on what your beat is.
So it's art and culture. Music is, well, that's obviously art and culture. Anything related in that whole spectrum.
Okay.
Now, when I say do other things too, I'll do other stories that are assigned, or some things on environment or whatever else is happening in the news cycle.
Yeah.
It's a small publication, so I'm fortunate that I am afforded a beat on arts and culture.
No, that's amazing.
Yeah. So, but I've been doing that since, 2012. And after podcasts started coming out, a little bit after, like a couple of years later, I'm thinking, I'd really like to do one of those. And when I fell into covering arts and culture, when I fell into writing, I fell in love with it.
Mm.
And then to narrow it down into arts and culture specifically, I was really just very happy to be doing that, very grateful. And I thought, there's more I want to talk about with this.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about artists and activists, or, with them, what they're doing, because it's always on the cutting edge.
Yeah.
There's so much art in LA, but then also specifically in the harbor area where I'm at. Got Long Beach, got San Pedro, and then the surrounding areas. It's like we were saying earlier, there's a ton of art over there.
No, yeah. Well, the more I interview people from the San Pedro, Long Beach, South Bay area, the more I realize that it is its own community of arts and artists, and they don't necessarily they do it almost for themselves, right? Like in a sense, they're enriching their own community instead of leaving it up to people to come to cities where the big institutions are,
exactly.
Which I respect, because not all cities do that, So even though you guys are close by, I really find that interesting. And there's a lot of community art. I've talked to a few people about just how engaged as artists they are in edifying the community about art. Because, we live in an America that doesn't necessarily have the... our architecture we're not in Europe,
right.
Where there's a basic art education that just comes from being in the city. So I find that really impressive and really important, because those are future listeners of our podcast that you guys are making,
Yeah, it's amazing. It's so rich. And, there's art community. There's a solid art community there, especially in, both San Pedro and Long Beach. The main art community in San Pedro are established artists, and they're still working. I know several of them well into their 80s who are still producing work. And then there's young ones coming through.
Yeah.
So it's really awesome to have it on both sides,
No, for sure. Yeah, and just the pace of life there seems a little bit more conducive to art making too, because I feel like you talk to LA artists, a lot of them are beat up all the time. Where I feel like it moves a little slower in a healthy way. Not I feel like the artists don't necessarily move faster here. The city makes them presents obstacles that makes them really, really exhausted. Whereas every time I talk to people in San Pedro, I'm like, man. Or every time I go,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
to what's it called, Angel Gate Park, and like just eat around there for what's it called?
Beautiful.
Yeah, there's like, it's
Yeah.
just you just feel like,
I was
oh,
just there yesterday. They
really?
had their Open Studios Day.
Oh,
They
wow.
do it twice a year, and so had to go.
Yeah.
And it was great. And I saw art, heard music, ate good food. So that's what it's about,
You can't
you
fight
know?
with that. Yeah. Have you ever
Yeah.
been to the Other Places Art Fair? That's I think in September. So I'm so excited that I get to introduce you to this. So basically, it is for artist run spaces and alternative permutations of art platforming, I guess would be a way of saying it. I wonder if Kay would agree with that. But so she's been doing it for a while. I think the first one might have been 2017. It's been going on for a while. They took a little bit of a break, but they're back this year, and they just do it at the it's an art fair for places like I've done it, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and then, you know, places like
Does it move around? Or
no, it's usually, well, I mean, they've done it at other places, but or at then it's called other places. They've done they've done it in North California, Northern California once, I think, but most of the time it happens in Angels Gate Park, and it's a really nice event. You see like some really interesting stuff, and then there's some booths that are like more outreach booths, but there are also like art installations and art showing.
That's cool, because I've heard the name, but I didn't make that connection. But that's awesome.
Yeah, and so no, yeah, I love all the stuff that goes down there, and again, it's a really nice vacation from LA's like hecticness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I went to a show yesterday, and it was great, and I had a lot of fun, but it didn't feel like I was on vacation the way it does when I go to see art in San Pedro. You know, even if I go to the Long Beach Museum of Art, it's like it's a vacation. You know, it's a little road trip so LA people need to go down there more often. I think they already do. I mean, I'm not breaking the.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. Like we were talking about with Angels Gate. The people obviously in San Pedro know about Angels Gate, and it's also reaching out to people in broader LA to come down, because there's so much great stuff going on there.
Yeah, it's an institution. And Long Beach also, they have I don't know if they still have the sound art walk. That was crazy. That was like such a specific.
Well, it switched to Angels Gate now.
Oh, it's at Angels Gate.
Yeah, it's called Sound Pedro.
Sound Pedro.
And it used to be, Flood was the one who started it in Long Beach. And in fact, at the Open Studios, Angels Gate was celebrating 20 years of Flood doing the sound walk.
Oh, wow.
Yesterday as well. But
that was yesterday?
It was part of the whole Open Studios thing.
Cool.
So there were some installations, there was a woman who was a roaming DJ. She was like over her shoulders and had
like
the whole thing.
Like a cigarette girl from
exactly.
the 60s.
Yeah, that's a good image. Yeah. But that's coming up in June, I believe.
So then can we go a little bit into how you became you in terms of like your interest in art and culture? I usually, did you ever practice art? Were you ever a musician? Or you've just always been an appreciator?
Always an appreciator. I mean, I took music as a kid, like many of us did. And I love music, but it didn't grab me in that way. But yes, big appreciator. Our parents took us to museums when we were kids. Yeah. And I enjoyed it.
Did you grow up out here in the same area?
Yeah, LA, South Bay. And it wasn't a drag to go. It was really interesting. I didn't really know exactly what I was seeing, the history behind it when I was a young child, but you learn as you grow older. But always an appreciator. Always performing arts too. And I had a whole other career. I worked in physical therapy, and I did retail, and I've worked in restaurants.
I've done retail too.
No more.
I'm glad you got out.
Yeah, me too. Likewise.
Yeah.
But about 2010, I went through a divorce, and it was restart. restart everything. And I ended up working for this person who had his own publication, and I was selling ad space, but then eventually that switched into writing. And as soon as I started writing, as I mentioned earlier, I just fell in love with it. And then realizing I can utilize this work and cover what I really love. And then, being able to have a beat, like I said, I'm kind of conflating two things, but I worked for this publication for about a year and a half. Then when I knew I fell in love with writing, I went to school for it. So I did it backwards.
Okay.
And then got more into it. This also happened as I took the job at the paper I'm at now. And then that kind of got more focused into art and culture. And Random Lengths is a proudly left-leaning paper. And like I said, they cover art. And there's not a lot of, other than the LA Times, there's not a lot of publications that dedicate a section to art constantly.
Yeah, for sure. Is your beat mostly centered on the area, right? The community? Or do you cover a lot of stuff?
I cover a lot of stuff. Like,
in LA as well?
Yeah, of course I have to have the eye on San Pedro.
Yeah.
And I do. But yeah, I cover LA quite frequently. I go to Red Cat and cover a lot of shows at Red Cat, which is always amazing. I've covered one of the best shows I ever covered in my whole life was at Grand Park, and it was a tribute to Gil Scott-Heron.
Oh, wow.
That was just amazing because there was this whole cadre of amazing musicians that all came together for this tribute. And,
that sounds amazing.
Slideshow and everything. So that was a while back. But so that's how I got into it. And having a love for it anyway, I stick with it. I love doing it. I love being able to cover artists and what they're doing, what they're talking about, and having this opportunity in a sort of small town, kind of like San Pedro's big, but it's small.
Yeah.
And it's great because I have relationships with some of these artists. I know them, we're friends, and others we're just friendly, but it's all, it's a very supportive community.
Yeah.
Artists and people who aren't artists alike, they all support each other within that community. So it's kind of amazing in a way. You don't get a lot of that. And you do get it in pockets. And I'm sure that there's places like that here, but you don't have it in throughout LA. Yeah, no,
it is very segmented, which is possibly because of the geography, but also, I mean, the benefit of of having that so condensed. Because I came from, I don't know what Miami's scene is like because I went back and it's changed. But when I was younger, there were like places you would go every week or every month, like there was the art walk on second Saturdays, and it was very much a condensed experience of like, you could go gallery hopping in a way that all of them were close by, which is what the feel for the sound walk was, like especially when it was back when it was in downtown was really interesting because you had all these different venues participating
and you could walk,
and it was just different. Like the projects were so different, and it was just, I just love how specific that was, so I've had really good experiences in the South Bay and all of that. So I can totally relate to that. Okay, so then you shot me over a little bit about topics that you wanted to discuss, and I know that you said I know that like it's interesting. I feel like people in LA are not as interested in environmental concerns, but I feel like San Pedro is very much more aware of that. Maybe because of the proximity, maybe because there's no hope in LA of like deconcretizing it.
Yeah.
But I know you mentioned that you wanted to talk a little bit about that. And you mentioned activism again. I've heard different artists talking in terms of activism in terms of community projects that are influential and kind of foster a sense of concern for issues, right, among youth, which I think is really interesting. What are you interested in? You mentioned activist artists, and you also mentioned on a note you sent me about topics that you were interested in environmental concerns.
Those so art, social justice, and the environment are largely subjects I cover in my podcast.
Okay.
All based around art, mainly. And those are subjects close to my heart. It's interesting that you mentioned that, people being concerned, in San Pedro and in that harbor area about environmental issues. I agree. I think people are generally, and I hope they are, in the wider LA area, but we're very close to nature.
Yeah.
You've got the whole rugged coastline. There's a whole landslide happening just a few miles away from us.
Really? There's a landslide right now?
Yeah,
wow.
The Portuguese Bend. Have you heard of that area?
No.
It's just a few miles out from San Pedro where it connects to Palos Verdes and the Wayfarers Chapel. Did you hear about that?
No.
It's the Glass Church.
Okay.
And that's over there. And it's a major landslide area. Wow. And they're having to dismantle the Glass Church that's been there for, oh gosh, I should know this, but I think it's been there since at least the 40s, but I'll have to look that up. But anyway, many people have gotten married there and they're having to dismantle it.
But they can put it back eventually. I think it sounds like the idea might be.
Probably not there.
Not there. Oh, because it's just not worth it.
Yeah, but it needs to be in an area with trees and nature. But anyway, we're very close to nature.
If you get sun directly into that, it's gonna be hot as hell, right?
Yeah, well, it is. It's a glass church. It was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright.
Oh wow!
Or one of the sons. God, my facts are just wacky today.
It's okay. This happens in podcasting. You think you know things, and then you start referencing them. You've done it.
But it's got these huge glass, windows, and you could see the trees from when you're inside. And
wow.
I was fortunate enough to talk to the granddaughter of the woman who wanted it built there, the Vanderlips. Mm. And she said that her grandmother, the whole purpose of it was so you could be in that church and feel like you were out in the woods in nature. So
that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I kind of, you are very positive, in terms of like I think that it's interesting. Do you cover some of the more political angles you said about like social justice? What do you mean by that? Because we might as well just get it out of the way. I know that you're very in support of Palestine. I am also very much in support. We've set some ground rules about what we can and can't say, so I feel comfortable bringing this up, and I wouldn't spring this on a guest unless they were vocal about it and felt comfortable talking about it. Yeah. But one of the things I think is interesting about this moment right now is that so many institutions that are radical and white cube intense are very much shying away from this topic. Do you find that are you able to write about it because I find that like hyperallergic, I've seen Matt Stromberg write a little bit about what's happening. And I'm not sure why he can do it. I'm guessing the ownership might be okay with it, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. So is that something that you're coming up against? I'm really interested in terms of censorship because nobody's really talking about it. I think that when the big day that I'm not going to say recently happened in October, I just don't want to get flagged by YouTube. Yeah. I feel like I saw a lot of spaces and a lot of galleries address that, and it's interesting because even in this show, I have to be very careful about how I talk about things because of YouTube censors and whatnot. Have you found, am I imagining it, or have you found that there is like, as radical as we'd like to think of ourselves as artists, there's a lack in that discussion? And I ask you because I know that you're very engaged in that.
I think so. I think there is a lack. Well, there is not on Instagram.
No, yeah.
We know that. I wish more people could be exposed to that.
Yeah.
Because that's what it's about. It's about broadening your sources.
They're banning a whole social media company because they don't have necessarily control. Like it's radicalizing a whole generation of people, right?
TikTok? Yeah. It's funny. Yeah. I mean, it's not funny, but yeah, that's very true. And there's a lot of reasons for that I'm not even aware of. But there's a few that are pretty obvious. I'll just, as an aside, my son, for instance, was saying that's where he goes when he's doing a search.
Oh, really? Wow.
Now, where do we go when we do a search? There's another place that everybody goes to, but there's another generation now that has found this out. So that's probably in there too. That's probably part of the reason for some of this. But there's two things. I would like to address this a little bit more. Excuse me, on the podcast. But that deals with the right guest, finding the right guest and
I also know
the message and everything. As far as the newspaper, yes, we do not shy away from it.
Oh, that's awesome.
We are a local paper, but we deal with politics, and that goes everywhere. And so we have names, we have contributors that there's some people that are syndicated that we can use some of those articles.
Oh, okay. So that's awesome.
So that's getting those messages in here through the local paper to the community.
That's great.
And people love us for that, and they don't.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, is like, there have been very few things in my lifetime that I know it's dangerous to talk about, know, and what I mean, I definitely, like, this is not an opinion that I have not heard elsewhere. I mean, this is not a unique opinion. I'm not like revolutionizing the world by saying this, but I've heard, there's an interesting perspective about what's happening now at the universities, which is that, what's it called? That like, once you have like the rich, the kids of rich people doing this, and they're putting a lot on the line. I mean, it's been shown that there is doxing going on for protesting against this stuff. Yeah. Like there was the Wall Street guys that were like, writing the open letter and trying to get those people. They wanted to know who was protesting. This is like early. And at that point, I was like, oh, I guess they're going to be able to stop this. And they haven't been able to stop speech. It's really interesting. And so one of the perspectives I've heard is that it wasn't during the Vietnam era. It wasn't until the kids that were in universities started protesting and started getting in trouble, starting getting arrested, and their parents who had influence were able to address their arrests, that things actually started to change, right? So we're in a really interesting moment in terms of that, and it's interesting. I think it's awesome that you get to write about it. And that you are at a place where you can. I think it's also very
address it.
Yeah, and I think it's also very brave for you to do that, because that limits your hiring options outside of that. Like. So I want to commend you on not being a career opportunist and actually having principles. That's really, really hard to do right now. And I know, because I'm compromising myself even as I speak, just to be careful,
And there's like, I don't know how to describe it really succinctly, but we have the mainstream media, and then we don't. We have other media. Yeah. And speaking as somebody from the media, that's a weird little thing to grapple with. It's not. It's a big thing. But with the podcast, as I said, it's a matter of getting the right guest. And what I mean by that is somebody who has knowledge of history.
Yes.
Maybe is somebody from that area, or their family is, and in their background. Who can speak to that a little bit more. And the other person I'm really following on this very, very strongly is Naomi Klein.
Yeah, oh yeah. She's been pretty good about stuff historically.
And she went to the I don't know which, I think she was either at Columbia or New York University with the Cedar on the street that they did, and she had a speech. And so I think it's bringing light to the issues and letting people hear what all is happening. I think it's just really important. And, I thank you for bringing it up. I really do.
No, I mean, I suffer from the same concerns when I'm trying to bring things up. I also don't necessarily want to put people on the spot to speak about something that's so politically charged, because that's not fair to my guests. They're my guests. They're here to do PR. This is mostly a PR show for artists, right?
I get it.
And that's the intent behind platforming it. People and I totally respect the way that you are consider going about it on podcasting. I want to be clear where I stand without getting in trouble, and then I also want to be clear that censorship is limiting what I can say all the time, and
it's very real.
And at the very least, I feel a responsibility to do that if I can't actually say exactly what I'm thinking about the situation, go ahead.
As an example, there was, you remember, of course, the Mahsa Amini, the Kurdish woman from Iran who was arrested for not wearing her headscarf appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
And then they murdered her, basically, in jail. And all the protests subsequently that came from that went on and on and on for months. I wanted to address that on the podcast. And I was able to speak to an author who wrote a book called Daughters of Smoke and Fire. Her name is Ava Homa, and she's Kurdish. And she lives in the States now, but she was born over there. And she wrote a fictional book. But what was in that book was very, very relevant to what is happening, or what was happening with this whole uprising in Iran when all this happened. So, and she's got a journalism background too, so she could speak directly to it. And so between her book and then her own experiences, we were able to have this podcast to bring more awareness to it. And I was just so grateful to have that.
No, it is. And it can be a challenge, especially out here. It's especially like for me when I'm doing art podcasting specifically, cause there are definitely, I actually don't know any Palestinian artists. So if you guys know anyone, please comment down below and reference me to them. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting solidarity movement. I grew up in the 90s, so I would talk to Vietnam vets and stuff like that, and they really informed my perspective. But I don't think I really saw the full scope of what we live in, like the real cynicism behind the way things are done until this moment happened, Oh
yeah.
And one of the things that's shocking is is that information control, and like to some degree it's very frustrating. When somebody, like, I always laugh when people are always talking about American Russian propaganda, and like the notion that Russian propaganda is so penetrative that it's going to penetrate through American propaganda and have more of an influence on you than like your own government does is so foreign to me. But there's so many there. I think that there's like and sorry for going so deep into this, but I think that what you're talking about is like it's really hard to be upset at people when ignorance and like when they're being manipulated, and so I think part of being an American for me has been sort of coping with the idea that, like, to some degree, not everybody's ready to live in the America that we both live in. Like the reality of like waking up to like, oh no, everything I believe is really, really wrong. And we
were told wrong.
Yeah. And then like the defensiveness to that fantasy that people have, right?
Wanting to hang on to it, you mean?
Yeah, wanting to hang on to it and being very upset at you for saying things. You know, like I've learned since I started doing the podcast that I alienated people by saying things that I thought were a given.
Wow.
You know, like especially on Instagram. So anyway, we don't have to delve too much into it unless you have something, anything else you'd like to say.
It's hard. I just think that I'm a person who historically, I've tended to be more optimistic. You know, that's just more my nature. Faced with what we know now, that's, I wouldn't say it's changed, but it's opened up a lot more awareness for me. And it's hard I keep looking at these people on Facebook who are talking about Gaza. People with knowledge about this. And I keep looking, and it's heartbreaking, but I want to be aware.
Yeah.
I want to know what's happening. That's a natural curiosity that I've always had. I've always been a very curious person. And some people are, some people aren't. But we still have to know what's happening. We can't turn away, because it's that old saying, you know, if they come for this person, they come for this group, they come for that group, and next it's going to be they come for you. And there will be nobody around because they came for all these other people that nobody stuck up for, nobody spoke up for. And we know that story, we've heard that parable, and I'm not trying to simplify it, it's just so true.
No. Well, I mean, one of the things that's kind of dark about that is that, you know what? I'm not going to tell this anecdote. I'll tell you off air.
Okay.
Just because it borders on some guidelines that we talked about earlier. But yeah, no, it is. I mean, but even there, watch, you know, I censored myself right there, right live, you know, because I don't want to be there. There is an element to the weaponization of misconstruing things.
Well, everything's upside down now.
Yeah.
Everything's upside down. We are living in 1984. We are in that
100%.
book. I just think that we have to look past our given education.
Yeah.
And really talk about things. And I don't think that that's fostered in our school system.
No.
You know, it's been a number of years for me since I've been in school, but
I can't even imagine what the school system is like now. It was such a failure for me. You know, like it just let me down.
Well, I mean, luckily, I think I got a decent education, at least up through, you know, middle of high school. I think I got a good foundation.
Yeah.
And I hope my son did too. I don't know that that's happening. And there was this, totally an aside here, but I won't name the person, but it was somebody who was in LAUSD who made a comment. I'm back to art now.
Yeah, no.
Who made a comment that LAUSD is woefully awful in promoting the arts within their school system. And that was just so sad and a shock for me to read that this person said that. And that made me want to look into it further, because you've got, living in America, New York was always like the art capital.
Yeah.
I think LA is very equal, if not surpassing it in a different kind of a way, not in the conventional way.
I totally understand what you're saying. It is a different environment. The landscape lends itself to completely different things. I just actually this week's episode that's out is with Jacqueline Cedar, who runs who's an artist-run space, but she also sells work, which like is not a pressure that a lot of LA artist-run spaces are succumbing to, right? I think that space availability is very different here, and all of that, and that changes the dynamic. And one of the things that Jacqueline was saying is that, like, yeah, the mindset is completely different. What matters within that space, and I would say, yeah, it's probably still pretty valid here because it's a huge community. You know, there's a lot of people. That's not to say I'm not super fascinated and making the trying to bridge the gap between me and New York. I'm definitely trying to have more New York people on the show because I think, it's interesting to have a broader scope
Oh yeah,
of
totally.
everything. But yeah, one of the things that she kept she said that there were collectives like the kinds that we get out here where it's a bunch of people pitching in to pay rent out in New York. But I was surprised at how many apartment spaces people or spaces run out of people's apartments were happening in terms of her experience. It's anecdotal, so I don't want to say that that's exclusively how the artist run scene is, but also just the idea that she's like it's a job hustle. She's trying to make, whereas like you could just do it pro bono for forever just to be like a cultural not gatekeeper, but platformer, in out here. I think that happens a lot,
I'm not following you on the last comment.
So like, I think that there's a lot more spaces that run at a deficit because the point is not to make, and is not necessarily for commercial success. That's not to disparage it, but right. I think a lot of that happens out here because not that space is cheap or anything, but per dollar per square foot it is. Like if you really think about, I mean, I can't imagine what $3,000 gets me in New York versus over here.
That's true.
So those little dynamics are interesting to me about the whole way that LA works.
That's another reason why I'm sure you probably have heard that's why a lot of people have migrated from LA to San Pedro.
Yeah,
for the rent.
Yeah, for sure.
Space.
For sure. I'm rent controlled, so I would not be able to stay here, like right now. Yeah. Right now I would probably be somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole thing. There's so many, and San Pedro is the next up and coming big gentrifying community. Yeah. It's San Pedro's always been on the verge of gentrification, and it's just it's just been push pull. But I think it's really happening now. There's this whole West Harbor that's going down where the old Ports of Call used to be, that was close to everybody's heart. Mm-hmm. That turned it became dilapidated.
What's Ports of
Call?
What is
but
that?
It was Ports O Call.
Ports O Call? Was that like a
fisherman's village kind of a thing? And it was sort of like a tourist space, but they had really unique shops. Uh-huh. Everything that you can imagine, from candy to clothes to whatever. And then they had, Ports of Call was a whole village. And then they had anchor restaurants, and it was a bustling place in the San Pedro community for decades. And eventually, in the last several maybe last 2 or 3 decades, it kind of declined. And the port, that's the other thing. There's a port there. There's a huge port. It's one of the biggest ports in the world, the port of LA. The port took it over, and they've leveled it, and they're building anew. And that is a whole big other subject, but they did basically not listen to the community.
Yeah.
But they said they were gonna, and then they didn't. So all that's happening right now. And it's called West Harbor. Mm-hmm. And you've been to San Pedro, so the downtown area?
Yeah.
So if you go to the bottom of 6th Street, at the very end, that's where, if you cross over Harbor Boulevard, that's where Ports of Call was, and that's where Harbor...
West Harbor, you said?
West Harbor is now, and it's still being built right now. And it's like many other things taking a long time. And everybody's like, what is going on?
Some people get paid per hour,
Yeah. So, but at the same time, there's this really, really big struggle to have this West Harbor hang on to or bridge to the artist community there, because that's what makes San Pedro what it is.
Yeah.
And that's not happening if we leave it up to the port.
Yeah.
So that's a big struggle that's happening. But at the same time, there's been some spaces opening up as far as artists, like studio space. And so there's good happening with this gentrifying stuff going on.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do we make the best of it?
Yeah, unfortunately, arts are always a tool, that are always weaponized in that way. Yeah, I was recently talking to somebody that bought a house in South Central, and they were like, "Yeah, I'm basically a gentrifier." I'm like, "Do you have a choice?
Yeah.
Are you gonna move into Beverly Hills?"
I know.
It is one of those things where you have this weird guilt. Like one of the reasons that I never say what neighborhood I'm in is because I don't want it to be like hip,
Yeah.
like
yeah.
I don't want to, or I don't ever want to use the cachet because it's already going to start getting hip, like it's going to happen without me. And I don't want to be like the one that's like, oh yeah, this podcast, we represent this neighborhood. I'm a guest here,
Yeah.
But it is, unfortunately, like when you open art spaces, it's just almost an inevitable side effect, like you bring culture to places and that's where people want to live. Like, yeah,
that's people are drawn to it,
and the artists are drawn there because they can't afford anywhere else.
Right. And it's there's a little bit of everybody that lives in that community. It's a immigrant community, historically, but that attracts artists. The rent is cheaper, and you've got this amazing coastline in this area that you can work with. It's not to say that you have to paint the coastline, but it's amazing, the whole thing, put together. So there's a lot of changes that are happening around that area, and we don't know what's going to happen.
No, I know that uncertainty is
a little scary, because it's like, what are we going to wake up with in another year? It's like, what is it going to look like? I remember what they did with well, you didn't grow up here,
no.
Back in the 70s, maybe early 80s, 3rd Street Promenade.
Mm-hmm. The Santa Monica one?
Yeah.
Okay.
That used to be a different 3rd Street Promenade. It used to be more like, kind of a little bit more like what I was describing to you with Ports of Call, but not, it was a little, not kitschy. It was hip, but in a funky way. It was
like Abbot Kinney, but less upscale.
I haven't been to Abbot Kinney lately.
Oh, okay.
But very independent people with their shops. It could be anything from surfing stuff to art to clothes to whatever. But it was funky shop music.
Mm-hmm.
It was just independent mom and pop places, and they were all on this promenade, which was literally a promenade, and you had a little bit of everything, and you were getting like the real stuff, and people with studios there and everything, and great merchandise and textiles and everything. And then it became all conventional big box business type of thing.
No, I mean it's all Apple stores and and stuff like that. Yeah, for sure.
And
it's sad because it's like tourists come here and then they're like, oh, we're in Santa Monica, and then they're not getting like
Monica.
Yeah, they're just getting basically what they have at their I hate, like, there's like that industrial aesthetic that I think I'm seeing less of, but like I used to live in Culver City. And I was so naive. I was like, oh, cool, they're building a train for us, and it's not for us. And so there used to be like an empty car dealership and all of that. And now that is like this whole complex. I forget what it's called, but it's on National and Washington, I think. But yeah, and it's just crazy.
Oh, was it near the Helms Bakery area?
Yeah, it's close to there. Okay. It's not too far from what's it called, where the La Cienega, where all the art is, but it's like, I mean, it's definitely a bunch of blocks away. But it was just crazy. And then then all of a sudden these structures start rising, and then I see Jen Stark murals, like, who I didn't know, but I was like, I knew, I was a fan of her work in Miami. And then she ended up working with Miley Cyrus and a bunch of, like, she's just blown up. She's super talented. But yeah, like that's the caliber of mural,
Wow.
An artist that works with celebrities. I mean, I'm sure that's not a cheap mural to get up. But I was like, oh, cool. It was a weird closing the circle, but then also I couldn't live there anymore.
You're right. Yeah.
Which is when I came out here, and thank God for rent control, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, they basically put a train. I don't know why. I just don't know why it didn't occur to me that putting a train to the beach would make it so I couldn't live there anymore.
That's
And
how it goes.
yeah, but that is, things that you learn in LA for sure.
I know. But the other thing, the good thing about LA, and this, like I was saying with the art in comparison to New York, also with business, in fashion, you can come up here doing your own thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it might be a little bit more difficult now than it was maybe around 2000, but still, you can.
Yeah, things have gotten a lot harder, especially after 2020 too, because so many businesses shut down, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That wonderful pandemic. But there was, LA is a place where you can do your own thing. Definitely. Much easier than a lot of other places.
Yeah, for sure. So. And there's an encouragement. There's a cultural encouragement to do it because you see people trying, and not even that people are supporting your projects. It's like, like when I first moved out here, I was so surprised by how many people were just producers. And like, what does that mean? There's like a lot of like allowances for people to just kind of fuck off and do their own thing and not really be able to explain it, where your money comes from. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's like a lot of people that you're just like, what do you do for work? And you're like, I don't know.
It's a little obscure. Yeah. There is that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that makes it permissive where you can like take risks and like, no one's going to be like, oh, my friend Al does that, or, no one's going to be like, wait, you're not buying a house? Like in this, that's another thing, like no one's planning to buy a house.
Yeah.
But, so then like, what is the thing that you are most excited about? Like aesthetically, like, are you mostly interested in, like, where do you feel at home? Like when you see something, because you're not a critic, right? But you are drawn to events and you are like, what does it for you where you go to an event and you're like, you know what? Like maybe an example of like something that you went to recently where you were just like, man, that is something I need to write about. That gets my passion for writing out.
Well, there's so much going on in LA. I have to say, I've been a little bit of a hermit this year because of this project. I did a live podcast. So that was a big push.
Well, tell me about that actually also. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that is coming out. It has yet to be released. We are still working on editing. But I did a live podcast with 2 local artists that are pretty well known throughout LA, if not further out. Marie Thibault and June Edmonds.
Okay.
Both have had, one of them, June is still at Angels Gate. Marie used to also have a studio at Angels Gate. They both taught at Cal State University, Long Beach.
Oh, I've interviewed a lot of alum from there, and they love that program. Like that program. I mean, there's some successful ass artists that came out of there.
Yeah. There's a guy, and I'm not thinking of him, but he paints the farm workers. He draws.
He draws. It's okay. There is a lot of them. Is he at Charlie James? Maybe.
He was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was at MOLA.
Okay.
But anyway, so yeah, they both have taught there at Cal State, and they're both abstract artists.
Mm-hmm.
June's art deals more with social cultural issues. But in abstract form, and Marie is the environment all the way.
Okay.
But it's totally abstract.
Yeah.
And I'm like, these are 2 abstract female painters here in the area, prolific, and they know each other, which I didn't know at first, but they know each other.
What did you find out when they were on the panel? And they're like, oh, hey, how's it going? I haven't seen you.
When I realized that, what was it? I realized pretty quickly into it. I think I was talking to Marie, and she said that June actually stepped in to take over that program.
Oh, okay.
As a adjunct at the time. But anyway, but they're addressing these issues abstractly. So how do you, to the general viewer of art, you're looking at a beautiful abstract painting, but where are you going to see the environment in that? Where are you going to see? But it's when you look at the title, you hear the artist talk about the explanation. So that was the whole point. Bring them together and let them discuss these very relevant issues and how they're addressing it in their paintings. And I found out more about them even past our initial interview, about how they work and what they're trying to convey through their artwork. And so it was a great experience. But because of that, I haven't gone out so much this year. But prior to that, there's we have an art walk in San Pedro every first Thursday, and there's some great art that we see there at all the different galleries. But a whole event, I'm pulling a blank right now, but I will say that, for instance, recently, you know Judy Baca?
Not personally.
You've heard of her?
Yeah.
She did the Great Wall in the LA River. And they had a retrospective exhibit of her at MoLA. I think it was, it was in the pandemic. So it was like, we were just maybe starting to come out of it. It might have been 2020 or 2021, one of the two. And just now they've released the catalog for the exhibit. It took this long.
Yeah.
So she was giving a talk, and I'm just such a fan of hers. So I was like, I'm going right there, going over there. And I was able to talk to her, and she was able to talk. She talked about her work, and they were talking about the book and how things came together. So it was just amazing. So those things for me are really kind of cool, just to hear straight from the artist, because I love to know what's motivating them, how they're going from here to putting it on a canvas. And the other thing that's coming up that's exciting me, which will be, I guess it'll start in September, is the Pacific Standard Time.
I heard that it was coming back. You mentioned earlier, I think that has been a really successful show in legitimizing Los Angeles to the same, because I heard when the show was out, people were complaining that it didn't quite do that, but I think the profile of Los Angeles has grown since 2012, and and it's hard to deny that show had that intention and that happened. I mean, who knows if it's cause and effect, but I thought I learned a lot about Los Angeles art scene. So yeah, I'm super excited about that too. Do you know? You said September? Wow.
I believe it goes September to January.
Does this happen to you when you hear of stuff, you get stressed out because you're going to be exhausted?
Oh yeah.
You're like,
I'm already.
September's coming. Oh my God, I gotta.
It's like, and I do that with summer too, because it's like everything happens in the summertime.
Yeah.
It's like, how am I going to have time to do any of it? But yeah, that's a really good point. I think it did really put LA on the map in a big way in the art world.
It's almost like we had to or the city had to educate people about what was going on because everybody had been so focused on New York. Sorry, you were going to say something.
That's right. I think that's important, and it takes somebody like the Getty to do that, or an entity like the Getty to do that. I don't know. It went away.
I'm so sorry. I hate it when I do that. Like I put on a button on something that someone said, and then I just stop the flow of everything, and I'm like, oh, bad podcaster.
It's hard.
Well, this is lovely. Is there anything that you maybe want to talk about, like before we wrap up, that I haven't really asked you about? You said, what was it? You mentioned social justice in that context. In the context more locally of San Pedro, how does that manifest? Is it mostly like are those artists that you interviewed maybe a good example of that, or are there other concerns that happen, that political concerns that happen in San Pedro's? Is there art about gentrification happening there? Because there's a lot of that, I would imagine.
I wish there were.
Yeah.
And maybe there is that I haven't seen yet, but I wish there were, because I told you the whole gentrification thing in San Pedro. And
yeah.
they like to. There's a lot of murals in San Pedro, and mural art is important. And I think I would like to see a way to foster that more. They do foster that. I'm not saying they don't, but it's got parameters.
Yeah.
So I would like to see it fostered more. I think as far as social justice is concerned in the area, we're talking about equity. Like you're saying, rent.
Yeah.
But that's throughout LA. But going through the gentrification, we're really trying hard to hang on to what we do have that San Pedro is known for and what makes it the town that it is, artwork being part of it. And making those connections. There's a lot of, there's a place I interviewed, it's a nonprofit, and I interviewed the gentleman who runs it. It's called Collage. It's a performance space, music, but they do other things too. And he was saying the same thing about trying to promote people to come down to San Pedro because it's a bear to travel in LA on the freeway. And people, if you get it at the right time, you could get from LA to San Pedro in a half hour or maybe less,
and
depending
it's
on the time.
totally worth it. Like even like people love Malibu, whatever. Like I feel like what really makes me feel relaxed is when I'm in San Pedro. There is a weight that gets lifted off of it, I don't know what it is, but just like it just feels less intense, and I think if you need a break from Los Angeles, go see some art in San Pedro's for sure.
Yeah, we're there.
Yeah, and
it's funny because I totally appreciate what you're saying. Yeah. But living there, it's like sometimes I want to go to LA.
I know.
Like, what's happening?
I know, but LA gets very real.
Yeah.
It's like when you live here, it's almost like I'm jealous. No, I'm kidding. No, it is super convenient. I mean, I can go out every weekend. I'm not at all disparaging Los Angeles. I'm just selling San Pedro's benefits for people that might not have been down there. It's a respite. It feels like going to Florida, like, I mean, not in the same sense, but just kind of like, you're like, the ocean is there. You can kind of feel it even when you're not at the ocean. I don't get the same vibe when I'm in Venice, or when I'm in Santa Monica. Even though the ocean's right there, you can be walking you can be walking through Abbot Kinney, and it's not the same. So yeah, I would definitely promote people to go check it out. What was the newspaper again that you write for?
It's called Random Lengths News.
Random Lengths?
Like the length of a rope?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Random Lengths.
There's the other thing I'll say about the area and the harbor area and LA in general, but it's very pronounced. They have at Angels Gate the oh God, the name is going to go right out, but it's the Native American Gathering of the Elders.
Yes,
they do that annually, but there's a very strong awareness of the immediate history there.
Yeah,
the Tongva, and it's respected, and it's a given.
Well, I mean, I'm going to say it's this whole area is so legit. I actually just had Gloria Jem Sanchez, who's from
she's great.
Yeah, she's from there. And she basically is involved in some capacity. I forget exactly because you do podcasts and the information goes in until you edit it. You don't refresh it. It's like when you review for a test.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, no, and I mean, it is an amazing cultural experience with a good cultural heritage, and I've had people on here talking about the vegetation there is very specific. It's a really great. It's really great to see culture in these small areas, and being, like that speaks to the identity of a San Pedran. And technically it's San Pedro, but
I know, but don't tell them. I know, it's so weird.
Yeah, no, I'm kidding, but
it's coming together in a way too, where I think I didn't see this growing up in that area, in that region, but now there's this more overlap where San Pedro, the whole harbor area is becoming more amalgamated. We're connecting to PV. We're connecting to Wilmington. We're connecting to Lomita. Obviously, Long Beach and San Pedro, they're sisters, basically. And I'm seeing more of that. And I think that's very promising.
Yeah.
For 100 different reasons. But I think reaching out to our neighbors and getting to know each other and spreading out. I heard somebody say, and I grew up in the area and I never really thought about it. He said, everybody is in the South Bay. It's not sectioned off.
Yeah.
Like you have, there are pockets, obviously, like everywhere, but it's not like this firm line, like the Latinos live here, the whites live there, the blacks live. It's not, it's everybody's merged.
Nice.
And so coming up in that, you kind of like, you take that for granted until somebody actually says that coming from a different place.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, I'm coming from Miami.
Really cool. Yeah.
Well, this is lovely. Thank you so much for making the trip out. And if you guys want to check out Angel City Culture Quest podcast, it's available on YouTube too, right? And
Apple, Spotify. Everywhere,
yeah.
Did you say apple pie?
Apple podcast. Do you remember how much of a pain in the ass it was to get onto all those RSS lists? That's inside baseball. We can talk about afterwards. But no. And then where can people find you on Instagram? And then they can find you in the paper, obviously.
Yeah. Instagram is @CultureQuest.
@CultureQuest.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then do you have a personal one? So hard to manage too.
No, I just do that one because it merges. There's so much art and nature and environmental stuff I'm always covering and being in anyway. So I just But yeah, I should have a special page.
No, you do not commit yourself to doing more Instagram. It is torture.
Oh my God, it's so time consuming.
Oh my God, yeah. No, it's brutal. But we're not going to feel sorry for ourselves. We have very, very fun lives, right? Like we get to do the thing that we care about the most. So that's one of the things that I was excited about having you on the show. I'm like, I have a lot of artists and I have that perspective because I also make art, but I like the conversation with cultural, like people that are not cultural shepherds because that's maybe too grandiose, a self-title, but people that concerns themselves with this stuff is really interesting to connect with.
Yeah. Cultural
concerns that are not cultural war concerns. Oh my God, because that is exhausting. What a distraction.
And there's a bit of I won't say it's there's so much going on in the world right now, and it's not an escape. But to go see art and be in that, and it revives you. It does that for me. I'm sure it does that for you. Or when you make art, for instance.
You can't just focus on the worst things humans do all the time. Okay? Because then what's the point? You need to fill yourself so that you can be engaged in the other fights. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then it helps you understand like there's a very humanizing thing about art that I feel like when it resonates, there's a universal element to it that is humanizing. For example, I'm saying this because I'm basically name dropping at this point, but I went to Tita's show yesterday, and she really talked about how what makes her work successful and resonate is because even though it's personal, it's universal. So I really respect that element of the arts. Like it is a dirty business and it's corrupt and it's got all these horrible things about it if you really get into it and you start looking at all the details and who buys it and how the art markets are run. But the whole world is like that. So like why would the art world be different? So that cynicism is pragmatic more than anything rather than hopeless.
Right. Yeah. You have to be pragmatic. We do. The other thing I wish more would be, if I could say one thing, I would wish that the big institutions would welcome the independent artists more.
Yeah.
I know they have a mission and a responsibility and things that they do, but I was astonished a couple of years back to learn that in some instances where there have been some independent galleries that have reached out when they had something just fabulous, something amazing, and they wanted to share and co-collaborate, no response.
Wow.
And it's like, how in the art world does that happen? You know, and again, it's like you're saying, you have to be pragmatic, but art is so engendering and so it's inspiring and in ways, life-giving in ways. How can you not respond? How can one art place institution not respond to another art institution? No, I know there's a whole power dynamic. I understand all that, but how does that happen?
Yeah. You know? No, it's an interesting point. It is, I guess, I don't know. It's interesting. I guess they're trying to claw onto their relevance.
I want to see what happens with LACMA when it's finished. The new. Yeah. I've heard so many crazy things about it.
About what they're going to do with it? Yeah.
I think generally the critique is less space, less visible art. Or wait, it was maybe more space, but less visible art because the rest of it's going to be stored. And they're going to have certain collections or something along those lines that are going to be seen. And they're going to rotate things rather than having a designated, this is always here, this historical thing. It could be, you know, sculptural stuff or artist, you know, something from the Renaissance or whatever. They're doing this rotation, so you can't, like, the way I understand it, you can't go to LACMA like you used to be able to and know that you can go see something that they've always had because it might be in storage because they're
constantly rotating. Yeah.
So that's kind of weird. I'm interested to see how that's going to come out.
Yeah, I think it is interesting what you said about those institutions because, like, you know, the my understanding is that a lot of the famous museums are showing the people in the famous galleries, right? And it's almost like a ping pong game of validation. Whereas like this artist is valid and like, yep, is valid. It's interesting, but it's just interesting how the thinking changes when you go into like the higher stakes worlds, you know? Whereas like we're more community-based people. So like that seems insane to us, right? Like, can you imagine me being like, no, I don't want you on my podcast because you're a competitor? Like that's not like for us, like I like we were talking before, I was like, I'm trying to get more podcasters on the show that do art podcasting because we're such a rare breed. And if we can help each other's profile grow, like that's amazing, you know? Like that's how comedy podcasts do it. That's like, but yeah, it is crazy how that works. Like you have to, like, I guess maybe I'll get to a point where I'll like be so selective about who I'll like completely sell out. And then I'll sit there and be like, I understand. But right now I don't. Well, cool. Yeah. Thank you so much. And anything else that we forgot to plug?
Nope. Stay tuned for the live podcast when it comes out. And there's more along the way.
Cool. Yeah. No, I'm excited to see more. Yeah. I was very impressed with you doing a live show because I know how much of a pain in the ass that is. and it seems like you did it. I did it at OPAF. You did it at an actual venue, no?
Yeah. Tango San Pedro or Grand Street Arts. It kind of has two different names, but it's basically an art venue. Yeah.
Cool.
Whether it's dance or photography or
were you on a stage?
My technical producer built a riser for us.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So technically, yeah.
Is this your partner?
Yes, he is. My technical producer partner. Yes, Douglas Johnson.
Oh man, I need a girlfriend so bad. Just like exploit for labor. I'm teasing.
He did. I might have produced the the actual show part of it, but he did the rest.
Yeah,
he did. So very fortunate. Yes.
No, it's good to have a collaborator. All right. And thank you guys. Oh, thank you for doing the show. And thank you guys for watching. We'll be back next week with another artist and another topic that may or may not be art related. You're a writer, so I'm just going to include you as an artist.
Thank you.
Yeah. I know. I mean, if you have passion for writing, I mean, what else is there? You know? Yeah. And you're also not parodying CIA talking points.
No, independent.
So that's a journalism I will include as an art in these days, because it is gone.
We need help, folks. Yeah. We need help.
Yeah, free Assange.
Free Assange.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess I'm having so much fun. I'm forgetting to end the show. We'll see you guys next week. Thank you.
Thank you.